Hello everybody, hope you are well. Mr. Brown here. Welcome to another session. Hope you all had a good Easter break. Today we are going to be looking at Mercutio's death, okay? And we're going to investigate how this is presented to us by Shakespeare. Now, I'd argue that this is possibly the most important, well, one of the most important moments within the play, and it's really important that you know this bit really, really well, because Mercutio's death sort of acts as a catalyst, so it kick-starts loads of other events that happen. To this point, everything's been reasonably nicey nice, and now it all kicks off with the first death of the play, okay? So, in the last session, we looked at the bit leading up to his death. So, just as a bit as a recap, we have got Tybalt. So, Tybalt has arrived wanting to fight Romeo. Okay, now he wants to fight Romeo because Romeo went to the Capulet party and he wasn't welcome. And we all know Tybalt is an antagonist and just hates Romeo and is there for the purpose that he wants to cause a fight. But however, Romeo does not want to fight, is refusing point blank, because if you remember rightly, he has just married Juliet and therefore is now Tybalt's cousin. Okay, and Romeo says, "And so did Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as mine own, be satisfied." So he's saying, don't fight, come on, let's get on well instead. Okay, obviously Tybalt is having none of that, but also Mercutio is having none of this because he thinks Romeo is a coward for not fighting Tybalt and defending his ground. Okay, and Mercutio says, "O calm, dishonourable, vile submission, Tybalt, you rat catcher, will you walk?" So Mercutio is challenging Tybalt to a fight instead, taking Romeo's place. Tybalt quickly agrees to this. He says, "I am for you," and draws his sword, and then before we know it, these two are having a fight in the middle of the street. Okay, so it's Tybalt versus Mercutio. Romeo doesn't want this fight to happen and is doing anything he can to prevent it from happening, okay? So that's the setup of the scene. That's where we're at. We're literally at the point where Mercutio and Tybalt are fighting. And now, during this section, the stage directions are crucial. They're really, really important. We can't ignore them, okay? They're the bits often in the brackets. In the text we look at school, they're in square brackets, all right? So I've just pulled out 5 of those stage directions. So the first being is when it says draws. So that means it doesn't draw a picture, doesn't paint a lovely picture, but instead it talks about Mercutio drawing his sword or his rapier ready to fight. Okay, and he does this way before anybody else, which shows us Mercutio is antagonizing Tybalt and really wanting that fight. Okay, so he starts it by drawing his sword. Tybalt then agrees, "I am for you," and he draws his sword as well to accept that challenge of the fight. Then obviously the next direction is them fighting. Okay, so they actually start sword fighting with each other. Normally this results in one person surviving and one not, is the idea behind the sword fight. Romeo then steps in, literally, okay, because he says during it, he says, "Beat down their weapons," talking to Benvolio, trying to get him to help them, and he reminds them that the prince expressively forbid this bandying in Verona streets. So he's saying, "You're not allowed to fight in the streets, you can't do this, stop." And then Romeo steps between them. He literally steps in between them to prevent them from fighting, which you would think would stop them, but Tybalt, as sort of our villain of the piece, we should perhaps say, he still continues to fight, and it says Tybalt under Romeo's arm thrust Mercutio in. So what this means is that Tybalt basically leans under Romeo's arm and stabs Mercutio, and that is obviously the fatal stab that kills him. To make things worse, as soon as he stabbed him, Tybalt does a runner. He runs away, okay? So Mercutio has now been stabbed. So Mercutio reacts in quite an odd way for someone who's been stabbed, okay? We'll look at his key quote in just a moment, but 2 of the things he says are, "Aye, a scratch, a scratch." So he tries to throw everybody off how badly he's been injured by making out that it's very minor and it's just a scratch. He's almost making a joke of it. And we know that Mercutio throughout the play has been this sort of bringer of humour. He's quite funny, he plays with words, he's a wordsmith, we should say. And now he's dying, and he's just saying, "Oh, it's a scratch, it's nothing, it's nothing." And then he does actually continue making puns and jokes even in his fine moments. He says, "Ask for me tomorrow and you shall find me a grave man." Now, if we call somebody a grave man, it means they're normally quite sorrowful, they're quite downhearted. You get the idea, grave, not feeling great. But in this instance, he's doing a pun stating that he'll be in a grave. Okay, so you'll find me in a grave. So it's the double meaning of the word, showing that he's making sort of a joke out of it and bringing humour even in his last moments. But that's not the only way he actually reacts, because we get some inkling of how he actually feels. He turns to Romeo at one point and says, "Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under your arm." Okay, that's quite accusing. Okay, why the devil? So he's linking it to hell. Okay, not a great image there. So it sort of shows how frustrated, how angry perhaps he might be, how frustrated he is. And it's sort of quite a rubbish way to die, being stabbed under somebody else's arm. He didn't get to fight properly. He was sort of stopped in his tracks. And then he also says, "They have made worms meat of me." Now, Shakespeare uses the symbolism of worms and worms meat quite a lot to refer to death, okay? And this literally means that when you're in the ground, your body's buried in the dirt, what's going to happen? The worms are going to eat you, okay? So it's a reference to being dead and buried in a grave. So the key quote then, this is one of the most important ones, you should remember this one at all costs, I'd say, is "a plague on both your houses." Okay, so a plague upon both your houses, you could say, or a plague on both your houses is what he's saying. And this is the curse, almost, that Mercutio leaves as his final moments, okay? Now, there's multiple ways of looking at this, okay, but the literal one is by saying "a plague upon your houses." He's been fatally wounded, he's dying in the street, and by saying this, he's saying he blames both the Montagues and Capulets for his death, and he believes the feud between the two families that has caused this fatal wound, okay? If it wasn't for the ancient grudge between the Montagues and Capulets, he would not have ended up in this situation. Okay, so he's angry at this ancient grudge that's been going on. Okay, it's the cause of his death. So he's cursing both houses, putting it upon both your houses, hoping and pointing out that they are both equally to blame for this ridiculous situation. Because you've got to remember, he's our neutral character. He doesn't actually fall on either of the families. So for him to die, it's showing how this ancient grudge is spilling into other areas of the world, perhaps. But then, for me, one of the key things is the importance of choosing to say the word plague. Now, in the Elizabethan era, when Shakespeare was writing, the plague was huge. Okay, so Shakespeare was greatly affected by the plague. In Stratford-upon-Avon, where he lived, a quarter of the population died from the plague. Okay, so that's a lot. 1 in 4 people were dying. What's quite interesting, I suppose, at this current situation is you could argue saying "a plague upon both your houses" might be the equivalent of wishing coronavirus on somebody. We're in that similar sort of situation. Coronavirus is not even as harsh or as sort of as dangerous as the plague, we could argue. Still very serious, don't get me wrong. But it's that idea, isn't it, that he's cursing them with something really, really unpleasant. Now, the plague was a horrible disease. It killed people in a very painful way. Most Elizabethans knew someone who had died from the plague. It's rumoured, it's never been, I don't think it's 100% proven, but they believe that Shakespeare's child, Hamnet, his son, died of the plague at the age of 11, or causes similar to the plague. And Shakespeare knew people who had died from the plague. So he's using this within his writing to stress and emphasise that Mercutio is angry. Mercutio is cursing them with possibly the worst thing that Elizabethans knew at the time. Okay, so I'll see you there. Okay, cool. Why does Mercutio say "a plague on both your houses"? Why might be choosing those words in particular? What does he mean by this? Make sure you link that to the idea that he's blaming the Montagues and Capulets equally. Okay, and think about his reasoning behind saying that. Challenge: how does Mercutio die in an unfair manner? How does he react to this? So thinking about the way he is stabbed under Romeo's arm and linking to the stage directions there for that answer. And then the super challenge. How does Shakespeare present the character of Mercutio during his death? What do we learn about, well, I should say him. What should we learn about him as a person and how he reacts, okay? So for that super challenge, you're looking at the bigger picture there. How is Mercutio presented? Look at the use of humour, look at the use of cursing that he's doing, look at the way he dies, and sort of rounding that together to give an idea, sort of a portrayal of how Shakespeare is presenting Mercutio to us as the audience. Thank you very much, good luck, and email us any questions and your responses. Thank you very much.